Welcome to our first online lecture. Hopefully this will be helpful to you, or it might be our last online lecture. But I wanted to give you some information about this concept, its philosophy, its application, most of all, its purpose, and to have a chance for you to have that information, and then we will come back to class and have a chance to apply it and work with it. It's a subject I'm really passionate about. I majored in English in college, but my master's degree is with a concentration in rhetoric and rhetorical studies. The reason I love it is it has philosophy and communication and politics and writing and reading, and so for me it was just a really great fit. I think you're going to find that it is a real part of your life. If you interact with people, you're going to be using rhetoric. So unless you are a hermit, if that's your life aspiration, then you are going to be using it, and you already use it. I do think that part of it is innate, but I think we learn how to make it more powerful when we learn about persuasion and needing to be heard. This quote by Theodore Zeldin discusses rhetoric and communication, and I think it really captures this philosophy that I have about rhetoric. Conversation is a meeting of minds with different memories and habits. When individuals meet, they don't just exchange facts. They transform them, reshape them, draw different implications from them, engage in new trains of thought. Conversation doesn't just reshuffle the cards, it creates new cards. We are not robots just exchanging information. We're people with active minds. And so when we get new information, that transforms our thinking. This very long definition actually captures the purposes that we would have for studying rhetoric. It also relates to the goals on the AP exam. Dr. Klein describes rhetoric as, first of all, an academic discipline. It's something you can major in, although maybe none of you would like to do that. It's something that you can study, something you can apply, something that you can quantify in certain ways. It's also a socio-political skill in language use. Knowing the right things to say to the right people at the right times in the right context is a very important skill. It's also about persuasion. How do we use language to persuade other people? And for me, the most significant is this idea of the energy of language. We're human beings. Communication is part of our nature. It's something that we naturally do. And the way that we communicate with certain groups of people varies according to our purpose. You don't talk to your best friend the way that you would talk to someone that you just met. You don't talk to your parents the way that you would talk to your boss or your teachers. Some of you who are religious, the way that you communicate with a spiritual being or God is also a rhetorical act, because if it's about a person with something to communicate, it's also about rhetoric. So I really believe that it's part of our humanity. And it's not just a skill that we learn in school. Hopefully we will learn to hone and improve that skill. This guy is Aristotle, and he is a very famous philosopher who is really responsible for our perspective of rhetoric. It begins in Greece in about 400 BC. And the reason that this historical perspective is important is it's when civilization is organizing and blossoming in Greece. There was a need for people to communicate more directly, persuade, be heard, and speak to the community. And so that's why we study rhetoric, is because of that need. Here are some great quotes by Aristotle that you can see that he is a very famous philosopher that has some very, I think, thoughtful ideas. And for us, rhetoric is the most important. We consider Aristotle to be the Yoda of our class. Rhetoric and education, it's always closely been tied with education. In Rome, how could you be an effective citizen? How can civilization function amidst conflict and power? There's a whole period of study of Christian rhetoric when the beginnings of the Christian church started. How do you persuade people to a new religion? That is about rhetoric. And in our first university in America, in Harvard, how do we create citizens? There are really three types of rhetoric. There is deliberative, forensic, and epideictic. And so we will talk about those. The three types of rhetoric correspond to their purposes. So forensic rhetoric you see in our judicial system to determine what actually happened in the past for an event. Deliberative rhetoric determines what should be done about the future, and we see this, or should see this, in our government. The most common type that we see today is epideictic, which is people praising or blaming each other. You don't get a lot of deliberative rhetoric these days because it takes time. Logos is one of the three appeals that an author can make with his or her audience. Logos refers to the logic or brain, the rational part of our brains, and logos includes facts, case studies, statistics, experiments, logical reasoning, analogies, anecdotes. And voices of authority can also be considered logos. Pathos, these are emotional appeals, and they're the easiest appeal to use. And emotions aren't all equal. There's some lower emotions like greed, lust, revenge, fear, power that are much easily manipulated rather than like love, fairness, etc. Ethos is the reputation of the speaker. It really matters who is writing the information or speaking the information. So we look at their trustworthiness, credibility, reliability. What kind of sources is this person using? Are they being fair? Certainly speakers are going to have some bias, but are they fair? So after this lecture, I'm going to have you take a look at some powerful moments of rhetoric that can change people's lives or a country, influence public policy. Hollywood rhetoric for some fun. Hollywood's very good at speeches. Martin Luther King's speech, I Have a Dream, is one of the most famous in America and is incredibly powerful. In order for us to be able to effectively analyze rhetoric together, it's helpful to have a framework. The rhetorical triangle is Aristotle's creation, and what it does is it suggests that in any speaking or written text, there is a situation. And this triangle links all of those ideas together. You have subject, audience, speaker, purpose, and context. This is a dynamic and changing situation. The rhetorical triangle can also be an acronym for those of us that are more linguistic and linear rather than visual. And each element of the triangle corresponds to one of these letters: speaker, occasion or context, audience, purpose, and the subject. We will use both terms. I'd like for you to think of the triangle as a way of seeing the world. We'd like for you to think of the rhetorical triangle or SOAPs as a way of looking at the world. I love this clip or picture from the movie The Matrix that shows a complete reality that exists below the surface. And so the rhetorical triangle and SOAPs is a way of looking at the world, texts, pictures, movies, in which you are looking at what's beneath and what is the structure of that text. The Google glasses of augmented reality also do that as well, where you can see a different reality on top of your reality. In the rhetorical situation, the elements include subject, what is the writing about, writer, who is writing, what background or beliefs does the author have that influence the writing, who is the intended audience, what is the purpose the writer is trying to communicate, and then what is the context or occasion for the writing. When we do rhetorical analysis, we are applying this triangle to a piece of writing. That might be someone else's writing, or it might be our own. At the beginning, multiple answers help us to arrive at the best answer. So often these are not one-word answers. You also often have to make inferences based on the text, and we want to move from good or and better to best answer. With this subject, we're interested in what the writing is about, what is the purpose. We want to go beyond the topic, beyond the one-word answer like education, and be specific with a phrase like a student's success in his education. Consider using prepositional phrases to be more specific. With the writer, we're interested in the writer's background, his or her education, their interests, abilities, profession, where this person published the information. We want to think of a phrase that describes a person who, and then you can fill in some of this information because that influences the writing that a writer has done. It also includes some bias. We also want to consider who the audience is, where something was published matters. The level of the language adjusts according to the audience and what the audience might be interested in. It also includes education or socioeconomic background. It is never everyone. So we want to make sure that we are trying to be descriptive with this audience. Always look at the place, whether it was published in a newspaper, what was the name of the newspaper, whether it was a book, because that influences the inference we make. When you describe purpose, we want you looking at AP active verbs to accurately assess what the author's purpose is. Is the writer describing, arguing, cajoling, illuminating, persuading, disagreeing? The active AP verb is going to be the precise way that we then describe how the author is achieving his or her purpose. Context is the most difficult for students to understand, so this is also called occasion. And what we're asking for is the big picture. What are the social, historical, institutional, or cultural forces that are going to influence the way the writer communicates with the reader? So questions like what is going on in history at this time, in society, in law, in government, because that is going to influence what the writer has to say and the way the writer says it. Also think about what you know about government. Because I think Star Wars relates to everything, I'd like you to think of learning rhetoric like learning the Force. In this picture, you are Luke Skywalker learning from Jedi Master Yoda, who is Aristotle to us in this situation. You will become a Jedi Knight by the end of the semester and be able to use rhetoric to your advantage. We want you to learn the way of the Force. Listen to what Aristotle has to tell you about rhetoric so that you can see the vision. Do or do not. There is no try. So hopefully from this lecture you learned what rhetoric is, why we study it, what are its different purposes, what are the different elements of a rhetorical situation, and be able to answer some questions about those. Thank you so much for watching this Introduction to Rhetoric video.